Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast, where we break down the practical strategies of this emerging science, starting with healthy light habits and going wherever the quantum superhighway takes us. This is your host, executive and life coach Meredith Oke, with a quick reminder that podcasts are conversations, not consultations, and definitely not medical advice. We're here for informational purposes only. To follow up with our amazing guests, please do check out the show notes, and to stay in the loop with the QBC podcast, join our email list, also linked in the show notes. My guest today has one of the craziest stories I have ever heard. And I've interviewed some pretty interesting people who've gone through some things. So I just want to put that out there. This is really worth listening to all the way through. It's quite long. And we spend a lot of time on the front end discussing Deanna's career. So because Deanna Won started out as a scientist working on laser technology with the US military. And she had a career with them that was very successful and very distinguished, that went on for decades. She moved all over the world with the US military, working both as a scientist and as a leader and manager of people. And so I think it's really important to understand all of that. So we spend a lot of time at the beginning of the podcast laying out her career, and it takes a while because she's done a lot of things, like really a lot of things. Her resume is long, but I think it's important and worth listening to for a bunch of reasons. One, to understand how these types of organizations work. And I think following somebody's career path is a really good way to do that. And also to understand the paradigm that Deanna was living in, not just, the military paradigm, but the scientific paradigm, and what it took for her to break out of that and to find other ways of being. So she went from, being in sort of top secret, highly classified positions in far-flung corners of the globe, all the way to being in hospice, right? Like she was basically dead. That's what the doctors were like, say goodbye, it's over. And here she is on my podcast. So clearly she's still around. And the story is incredible. And what she went through in terms of her health journey, and what the different layers that had to come off for her to understand what to do next, the different things that she tried. I think we will all resonate with it, even if we don't all resonate with being top secret military scientists. I think we will all resonate with her health journey, all the different things she tried, from starting with a vegan diet and moving on through all the things that we talk about. So buckle up and dig in. As I said, we take our time with this, but I think it's really worth it. There's a lot due to all of the layers of this story that Deanna so generously shared with us. So please enjoy this episode, and do not forget to visit bondcharge.com for some blue blockers or some red night lights, some red reading lights. These are just such simple, easy ways. You have these things around your house. It makes it so easy to optimize your circadian rhythms without really having to think about it. Just turn off the big lights, turn off the screens, and use your little red night lights instead. All right, everybody, enjoy. Hi, Deanna Won. Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. Such a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Meredith. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this.
No, I'm really excited to dive into your story. It's so interesting. I remember seeing your face on Zoom. I'm like, oh yeah, we had all these calls together during the certification, but I always appreciated your contributions because they were very, very deep and insightful, but I didn't fully appreciate how crazy your story is. I was reading up on you before this, and I was like, what? So I did not know that. Okay. So let's start with your professional background in the military, sort of before you had a major shift in the path of your life. Tell us how you ended up there, what you focused on, what type of work you did, things like that.
Sure. So I my venture into the military came through the fact that I went to the U.S. Air Force Academy for college. And I decided to go there because I wanted to do something that was kind of off the beaten path. And, between my junior, senior year in high school, I went to the summer scientific seminar at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and it's in Colorado Springs and just at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And it was just a gorgeous location. And I just wanted to really challenge myself. And, I didn't know quite the extent it would be, but that's where, I decided to study physics. And so then when I graduated from there, I received my commission as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. And it was really an amazing, start, because I was basically shown an empty lab room and told to go build a laser radar design laboratory. And so it
all
was,
right. Just your typical entry-level assignment.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I felt like I didn't know if I could even do the job, and I actually went and told my boss that. But he was like, "Oh, Deanna, you'll do fine." And so, with his confidence, I started that and actually developed the first coherent laser radar system in Wright Laboratory, and got to look at looking at non-mechanical methods of steering laser beams using liquid crystal technology. And so really exciting work. And then I moved from there, which was
wow. Okay. Sorry. Could you say that again? Using liquid crystal technology?
Yes. You're able to, rather than have something to manually steer your laser beam, if you put in, different voltage signals into like a liquid crystal array, that can actually phase shift your laser, essentially steering it. So, and it was tiny. Well, back then, so this is in the, late 1980s, and I got to investigate the world's first. It was 4 centimeters, so, fairly small. And so, the application is really to look at, improving the fire control accuracy if you're trying to, hit a target, and, you're able to take into account like the wind shear and all that into your calculations using laser technology and this laser radar. And the way I explain that to people is it's like, when you're driving your car and, some people like to speed. So, they use a little, radar detector. And, but the police, if they lock in on you, they're able to determine your speed, how fast you're going. And it's the same thing with laser radar, only that you can actually get 3-dimensional imaging back, information. So you can actually identify and know what the target looks like, whether you're looking at a tank or aircraft or what have you.
Wow. Okay. So that was your first project out of college?
Yeah, that was my first project out of college. And it was exciting. I got to see that, hey, these physics equations that we learn actually work.
Yeah, I would say so. That's amazing. I mean, just super cool. And we're going to, I guess, probably later circle back to the liquid crystal piece, but let's keep going with your story for now.
Okay. Yeah. And so from there, I actually got assigned down in Florida, and I got to work on testing electro-optic sensors aboard the F-16, and also got to look into nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare agent sensor technology, which was really interesting as well. From there, I did something called Education with Industry, where the Air Force actually allows you to go into industry to work for a year. And so I chose to and got accepted to work at Eastman Kodak Company, back in the film camera days.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, and I'm a photographer, so it was just like the perfect fit, and I got to kind of see things from a software side. They had me working on a project to look at the graphical user interface for the camera. It's called the deployable intelligence surveillance system camera that actually got deployed to Bosnia. And of course, Kodak was really instrumental in a lot of our satellite imaging technology as well back in like the 1960s, for example, with the Corona program. But from there, then I went back to Wright-Patterson. I was hired to be the military assistant to the Headquarters Air Force Material Command chief scientist. And so, that was really, it's a very demanding kind of job. It's one of these, very highly competitive kind of jobs that people love to get. And I was just excited to be able to do that. And then I went from doing that to working in international research and cooperative development agreements, and in particular worked very closely with some of our allies, with the Russians back then, because they had just the whole the glasnost, the opening of the former. So anyway, it was really fascinating because we got to tap into some of the great minds, Russian scientists, as well as looking at Japanese, the ejection seat technology for pilots to be able to eject out of an aircraft, and also work very closely with the French on some of the ramjet technology. And then from there, I went to work in Washington, D.C. It was a Pentagon assignment, and I was in charge of sensor technology, basically defending the budget before Congress as to why we needed certain, sensor technology. And from there, I moved out to Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is out in California. And that was my first assignment looking into space. And so my division basically was responsible for certifying that the rockets, and back then it was the Titans and Atlas launch vehicles, were flight worthy. And so I was there during the time when 9/11, happened. And so we went on a really, truly historic launch of, back then it was to be able to turn around and do a launch. We did 3 back-to-back launches within a month. And see, today it seems like, the technology has really improved, but back then it hadn't been done before. And so, so that was really fascinating to do that kind of work for a while. And then from there, I went to, the Air Force sent me to different schools. So I went to, Air Command and Staff College, Air War College, which is basically looking at leadership and warfare, command. What does that mean to be in command of a unit? And just looking at things from a very, strategic level, mid-level, and then strategic. And then I went to Joint Forces Staff College, which is really to learn how to work with all the other services, the Army, Navy, Marines, together in battle. And from there, they sent me to go work at NATO, which was in Belgium. And I worked at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe. And I initially was working in an operations center, which is basically looking strategically at the operations within the Balkans and Afghanistan at the time. And from there, I was brought in to directly support a general officer. It was a deputy chief of staff of operations as his executive officer. So that was really quite eye-opening perspective for me, because back then we got to work with 26, back then it was 26 different NATO nations. And, just how did they contribute in terms of their troops and equipment to the different military operations. And so, we got to look at the logistics as well for Afghanistan, as well as in the Sudan. And then from there, I got assigned to be the deputy group commander in Turkey. And that was probably one of my best assignments. I think, and because I know we'll be diving deeper into, of course, the whole sunlight story, but just being in the Mediterranean was such a huge contrast, from the over 200 days of drizzle and rain in Belgium. I felt that immediately, but I didn't understand why, of course, back then. But that was really, like I said, one of my better assignments because I think just the environment made a difference for me. And we basically were supporting U.S. troops that were assigned to NATO. And at the time, we were providing support to Operation Northern Watch, which was in Iraq. And then from there, I moved back to the U.S., was in Washington, D.C. again, working at the Missile Defense Agency, where I was in charge of space-based missile defense. And during my time, we actually launched 2 research and development satellites there to kind of prove the concept for missile defense. And then from there, I went to work at the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, where I was in charge of the Division for Mathematics, Information, and Life Sciences. And then later on, because I love the international cooperation, so I went back to work for International Division within that organization and just looked at funding a lot of basic science research with, different countries. So at the time we were looking, at countries that really weren't able to collaborate much, for example, who maybe didn't have all the infrastructure like in Africa. And so it was really quite fascinating. I got to travel there and just see firsthand how they teach, laser and optics in the university there. And then from there, I worked in the Defense Technology Security Administration, which was really looking at, can we release certain technologies, to foreign investors? Because, if it presents a threat to our national security, then we would have to, disapprove it. So it was, looking at a very top level, just, nationally, how we look at, sharing technology with different nations. And then from there, I moved to my last assignment in the Air Force.
I was going to say, surely this is the last one. Wow. They really kept you on your toes. This is amazing. Okay.
It was a lot of moving. Yeah. Nonstop. And I loved it. Your job never gets old. So my last assignment, I was working in as a joint program manager for biological defense. And so that is really looking at the acquisition and life cycle of, biological defense systems, enabling our troops and our allies to basically be able to detect, hey, has there been a biological warfare attack? And so that, was really, really, it was amazing. I was just thrilled to be in that position. And that is where I actually got diagnosed with ovarian cancer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's hit the pause button because this is where the whole track changes. This is where the train goes in a different direction. Okay. I honestly could ask you 5,000 questions based on all of that experience that you just shared. I mean, what an incredible career, Deanna, truly. And what I'm struck by is you were able to play across so many different areas, even just within the scientific realm. I'm hearing about, lasers into space, into health sciences and life sciences, as well as strategy and leadership and collaboration, innovation at very high levels in an international setting. So you have a very incredibly well-rounded foundation through all of that experience. And the fact that you were able to succeed in those areas is really quite extraordinary.
I'm grateful. I'm really grateful for the opportunities. And like I said, from my very first assignment, when I didn't even know if I could even do the job. And I just told my boss, I'm like, I don't know if I could do this. And And so it's been a growing experience. And that's the thing that I really appreciate about the military is that right out of school, you're kind of thrust in like a lot of responsibility and expected to just take the ball and run. And so I'm just, like I said, just extremely blessed to have been able to have those experiences and to be able to, just see the world through the military, because that has really broadened my perspective significantly. When you have to, just get along with 26 different other, 25 other different, nations, it takes, and overseas more so than I think in this country, relationships really matter, and, I came out of this, the American perspective where you're just always, grinding, you're working super hard.
Yeah, it's very transactional. Like, here's what I need from you, get it done. And that's not like that in other places.
No. See,
if you treat people like that, you are going to hit a brick wall.
Exactly. And see, I went over there and I had the habit of just eating in the office because we're always so busy.
Oh, no, that is a uniquely North American idiocy. We lived overseas as well. My husband tells the story. He did that on his first day and all his colleagues came over and they were like, what are you doing? Stop it right now. You don't eat at your desk, you moron. We're going out.
That's what my colleagues told me. They were like, we don't want to smell your food. You have to come down. You have to drink coffee with us, and so I learned, and it's like, oh, okay, and once you establish that trust, then it makes, the business aspect go so much smoother.
That's so true. And I think from that transactional perspective, it feels like a bit of a waste of time, right? Like I can get in that mode. I'm like, just get it done. And it's like, but if we do take that time to establish relationships and build trust, it pays off long-term because we know that person will have our back to a certain extent in a way that they don't when it's purely transactional.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess when you're working internationally with other countries and trying to establish, ideally, a peaceful world, these things matter.
It really does.
So good for you.
Yeah, what I found is sometimes, and I think you can see this historically through some of the conflicts we've been in, Americans have not been the best at understanding different cultures, and how do they really think? We kind of think from our Western lens. And to be honest, it's a fear-based perspective that we have in the military. It's always contingency planning. Well, we have to be prepared for all this. And so I think that, for me, having a dialogue, an open, honest dialogue with allies as well as with our enemies, quote enemies, I think is really needed in order to be able to move forward. I mean, when you look at like what's going on right now, just with all the different conflicts that we're involved in, there's a lot of assumptions that go into, just war planning and the policies that are made at the highest levels of our government. And, I think for true peace to be there, we really have to do a better job in terms of understanding, because you can see that, like even during the Vietnam War, our soldiers were not prepared for the guerrilla warfare in the jungle. We thought that, hey, we can just spray them with, Agent Orange and whatnot, but we underestimated the determination of the northern Vietnamese. And so I think that, if we don't learn our history, we're definitely going to be repeating some things.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you for your contribution. I'm Canadian, but we share a very long border. So I am grateful for your service to your country and to the world, and for being a person who was an agent and proponent of collaboration and peace within all of the many realms that you worked in. until the day, so we'll pick it back up, the day that you received an incredibly brutal diagnosis. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so it felt like it's something that just came right out of left field for me because I thought my life was going great. And when I was told that I had ovarian cancer, it was rough emotionally. I was terrified because I equated cancer to death, and not just death, but like a horrific death, one of suffering and pain. And so I couldn't even hardly sleep. I would cry at night because it was just so frightening. And what's interesting is after a certain period of time, and I think this probably comes from my military background, it's like, okay, Deanna, you wallowed in enough fear, let's do some research. You're a scientist. And so I started researching. I started reading everything I could, all these medical journal articles on ovarian cancer, so that I could figure out what approach I wanted to take to heal. And
right.
So what's interesting,
so because you had, and you have with your scientific mind the background to be able to dig into that, at a very high level. And what in the diagnosis, was it like, how early did they catch it? Were they like, oh, it's stage 1, it's what was that?
Well, my journey is really different. And so
Okay.
when they caught it, they said basically that they pretty much thought it was cancer. This was very early on. So this is my first time that I was hospitalized because I had such horrific pain, and it was on the right side of my abdomen near my liver, that my body was convulsing involuntarily. And so they put me on a morphine IV like immediately. And to my dismay, the morphine did absolutely nothing to relieve any of the pain.
Wow.
It was that bad. And so then what happened is it went from, okay, so morphine, which basically causes nausea, a lot of these opioids do. And so I became extremely nauseous, and they gave me anti-nausea medication, which then caused constipation. So then they gave me stool softeners, which then caused diarrhea. And
yeah.
At that point in time, they said, oh, we think you have a C. diff, Clostridium difficile infection. And I was like, I don't believe I did not come into the hospital with all these other issues. And so at that point in time, I just kind of made the decision that, I don't want any of this medication. And so, and because my mother's father, my maternal grandfather, was a traditional Chinese medicine herbalist, I grew up, taking these herbs as a child for whatever ailment, and there were no side effects. So I got to see this vicious cycle with the pharmaceutical drugs, and I had to sign waivers. I'm like, take this. I don't want this IV, and so what I did to deal with that horrific pain, because I was literally in a fetal position, just struggling. I remembered something that Deepak Chopra actually said in one of my training classes. And he said that if there's any pain in your body, just breathe into that space and send it love and compassion. And so that's what I did. And I did that for literally about 6 hours. That's how long it took. And then after that, the pain completely disappeared. And so I didn't really, like I said, I wanted to heal naturally because of that experience. And so basically what I did was I just decided, hey, I'm going to change my diet, because I was on a standard American diet. And what's really interesting is that 3 years prior to this, I was in the Pentagon bookstore. And as soon as I walk into the store, the sales clerk says to me, and she holds up this book, and she says in this really cute Southern drawl, she's like, oh, you have got to get this book. This is the best book ever, And I looked at the title, and it was called The Hallelujah Diet. And I was not into diets, but something about the Hallelujah piqued my interest. So I bought the book and I started reading it that night. And it was about this. The author was named George Malcolmus, and he basically healed from colon cancer within a year by changing his diet to basically a vegan diet. And the reason he did it is because his mom was a nurse, and when she had colon cancer, because she was a nurse, she just kind of followed the conventional treatment approach. And so he actually witnessed her just die a pretty horrific death after undergoing chemotherapy. And so he was like, I'm not going to do that. And so within a year of changing his diet, not only did that colon, that baseball-sized tumor in his colon completely disappear, but all of his other health issues that he's had since he was young. So I dabbled in it for the next 3 years. And so when I realized just how, morphine and all this other stuff did not help me whatsoever, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to shift and just do 100% vegan, raw vegan. And within 3 months of making that change, my elevated tumor marker actually dropped back to normal, and the tumor actually began to shrink. And so I knew there was something to that, because I went to all these different holistic healing places, and I just kind of went in like 100%. And after about a year of this, my doctor actually was amazed. He showed me a PET CT scan, and he's like, look, you've got central necrosis of the tumor. It's dying. And not only that, but you've lost all your visceral fat, which really is a good prognosis for cancer. And so back then I was really naive. I just thought, oh, this is great news. I'm out of the woods. So I went back to working, back then I was working 16 to 18-hour days in the military. And I went overseas for my job. I went to, Korea. I went to the Philippines, and I fell off with the diet. But not only that, you can imagine the circadian disruption I went through, because I would go back and forth the U.S. to those locations. Mm-hmm. And so by the time I got back to the U.S., all the good progress had basically reversed. And within a few months, I end up with, numerous hemorrhages internally. You could actually see the bruising on my abdomen. And it was like every 2 weeks I was having these hemorrhages that were excruciatingly painful. And then I ended up in hospice. Both of my lungs collapsed, filled with fluid. And I had to be put on oxygen because I was really struggling to breathe.
Oh my goodness.
It was rough.
So you reversed the initial symptoms using food and alternative healing methods. Then you went back to your old life, or to your regular life in the military, travel, long hours, stressful work. And you ended, and now new symptoms came, and now you're in hospice. Is that what you said?
Yes, I'm in hospice, and I become edemic. I start to retain huge amounts of fluid. Like I'm gaining like 10 pounds.
So are they like, we don't know what to do? Like, this is it?
Yeah, because basically what happened is once I came back to the U.S., they basically told me that, we could try to do surgery, but at this point they said that it had metastasized. And so they said that it would have a low chance of success. And so yeah, they were basically just trying to make me comfortable to die at that point. And the hospice nurse would, try to give me all these pain medications because it was a significant amount of pain. Mm-hmm. I got to a point where I could no longer eat. Like for roughly 40 days, I couldn't eat anything solid because by this time my stomach and my left lung was shifted further to the left because the tumor was just growing aggressively. It tripled in size in a matter of a couple of months. And so, with all the fluid and everything, it was just incredibly challenging to manage.
Yes. Okay. So you are at death's door. You are in hospice. It's not even like, oh, the prognosis isn't good. Like, you are in hospice. And yet, here you are right now, looking delightfully healthy. So what happened?
So what happened is, while I was in hospice, one night I suddenly, my blood pressure tanks, and I'm struggling to breathe. And then all the muscles in my body begin to contract, and I'm having this horrific pain in my abdomen, because it literally feels like I'm going to explode. Nurses who did not know that I had cancer thought I was 8 months pregnant because of the distension in my abdomen.
Wow.
It was horrific. And I have pictures of it because I couldn't believe it. I was documenting everything, the scientist part of me. But so then what happened is, at the time, my aunt and cousin were caring for me, and I text my cousin. I'm like, I need help, and I'm screaming. And so they call, 911. An ambulance comes, and what's interesting is that they see that I'm in hospice, and they don't seem to have the equipment they need, so they leave. And I'm in so much distress, but thankfully, so then my cousin calls the hospice nurse, and she's like, "Oh, just give her some pain medication and call me back in a half hour." And thankfully, my cousin said, "We don't have a half hour. I'm going to call 911 again." And so she called, and a second ambulance came out, and this time they took me to this kind of small local hospital, and they weren't going to treat me. And so, mind you, by this time, I was actually denied treatment 3 times from Johns Hopkins Hospital. They just, because at this time I did not want to do chemotherapy. And the reason I didn't want to do this is because I worked in that field, with the nuclear, biological, chemical warfare. And so if you look at the history, chemotherapy actually comes out of the military's chemical warfare program. It's almost like a repurposing of the chemicals that were used to kill people in war.
Really?
Yes. It's some of the same chemicals that's been repurposed. And I know it's controversial.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, you have like validated insider knowledge on that. So that would seem like a reasonable choice not to want to add that to your body.
Right. It didn't make logical sense to me. Even just looking at it, it's like, why would you put poisons into a body that's already having immune system issues? It's so hard on the body. And so I really believe that any therapy should do no harm to the body and its systems. And so here I am at this smaller hospital, and I am begging the ER doc to drain my abdomen, because I'm not kidding. It feels like I'm going to explode. And he was going to tell me the same thing like I heard from Johns Hopkins, and he said, "Oh, we can't do this. This is not an emergency room procedure. You might just have to wait until tomorrow." And I just looked at him and I said, I don't think I can hang on until tomorrow. And so he consulted with his colleagues and came back, and he said, "I'm going to do this to help you. This is not something I typically do." And I was just so grateful, because that literally, when he stuck that needle in, and this fluid started to come out, that relieved some of the pain that I was in. And so from that moment on, they decided to basically accept me into the hospital. And by this time, when I met the oncologist, he told me, he's like, "You've got 4 weeks left to live. Your only hope at this point in time is to do chemotherapy." And so he gave me 2 days to think about this. And what's interesting is that during these 2 days, I prayed, and I just said, "God, You know, if you want me to do chemotherapy, I will do that. But knowing what I know, I need to hear this directly from you if this is what I'm supposed to do. And what I heard back, Meredith, is ask for the cytology report. And I didn't know what a
That's specific. Thank you,
yes,
God.
yes. And I didn't even know what that was, but I'm like, okay. And it was because they had drawn all that fluid out of my abdomen. So they were going to analyze that fluid for cancer cells. And when I asked the oncologist for that, he was like, oh, no, we don't have time to wait for that. 100%. It's going to be malignant and you don't have any time left, you know? So he's like, if you don't do chemotherapy, I am going to put you right back into hospice where you will most certainly die. Those were his exact words to me. And because of what I heard back, you know, during my prayer, I pushed back and I just said, hey, look, doc, can you just humor me as a scientist? I really would just love to put my eyes on that report. And once I do, I'll make a decision with regard to the chemo. So finally he agreed. And it took a couple of days later. And by this time, I don't even know if I can hang on because the nurses are turning up the oxygen because the sounds coming out of my lungs when I was trying to breathe was just horrific. And I couldn't even like lay down flat because I was literally drowning in my own fluids. And so I had the bed kind of shaped like a little V, you know, to elevate my legs, which were huge. And, you know, I couldn't lay back. So I was literally like that. And he came back. And this is interesting too, because I don't hardly have enough blood. It's like at critical levels. I think it was like at a 6, you know, I think for hematocrit or hemoglobin. And so I had to be put on like 3 blood transfusions at this point in time. And then he gave me the report and he says, you know, your intuition to wait for this report was a good one because it came back negative for cancer cells, which was a shock.
What?
Yeah, it was a shock to the doctors. It was a shock to me. And he says, you know what this means? This means you can have an opportunity to actually have surgery. And I said, yes.
You're like,
but
let's go.
Yeah,
surgery, like, no problem.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Deanna. I mean God as in God. Like, wow. You just pulled that out of the field with your intentional prayer.
Yeah. And I had no idea, you know, who would have known that? And so
I guess God.
They couldn't do it though at the hospital. They were too small. So then they said, I'm going to have to see if there's a surgeon willing to accept you. And so finally they found one, and this was up in Baltimore. And I get transferred there, but they don't even have beds there. And I'm in a cardiology ward because, you know, by this time there was fluid around my heart. So they thought I was having congestive heart failure. And when the surgeon looked at me, he was like, you know, you look way too emaciated to even undergo a major surgery like this. So they were going to have to do another round of, you know, just diagnostics to see, okay, you know, what are the chances that, you know, some of her organs are going to fail? So they, at this point in time, they decided that my lungs were kind of an issue because I couldn't hardly breathe. So they're like, we're going to go in there and we're going to drain your lungs. And so they stick in this needle through your back, you know, between the ribs. It's really no fun. And what was really traumatic for me was that they ended up collapsing completely my lungs. And so it was horrible.
Grief.
After they pulled out like liters of, you know, just all this bloody fluid, I can't breathe. I'm trying to inhale. Nothing's going in. And so I'm choking, I'm coughing. And so they had to stop the procedure. And I was at this point in time, I was so traumatized. I didn't even want to go on. I literally wanted to die at this point in time. And I prayed, you know, I'm like, God, can you just please take me? I don't know how much more I can tolerate. You know, I couldn't move. I couldn't even roll over in a bed because I was so heavy with all the fluids, you know. And And I just thought, what kind of life is this? I'm dependent on the nurses to even use the bathroom. I can't even, function. But I had a friend pray for me, and then that gave me courage to kind of hang on. And so the next day they came and they said, we're going to press forward with the surgery. And so I said, okay. And they're like, don't be alarmed. You're going to have a tube down your throat. When you come to, you're going to be in ICU. And they said, and we're going to give you some more blood because you're losing way too much blood again. So I had 2 more blood transfusions, went into surgery, and I was just amazed, Meredith, because when I came through, I was not in the ICU, and they brought me back to my room, but I was so weak, I really was emaciated at this point in time, and they came to me and they said, we did the pathology. This is like 2 weeks later. And they're like, you have a very rare form of malignant ovarian cancer. And so they told me, they were like, we need to basically do another surgery, and you need to start chemo. And
so we're back to the chemo.
Yeah.
So it was cancer, but it wasn't showing up in that other test when they analyzed your fluids.
Yeah. And that was a sheer miracle, because I have spoken with researchers at Johns Hopkins, cancer researchers, who told me that whenever you draw fluid out of the body, it's supposed to be a straw yellow color, transparent kind of fluid. And anytime you have it just being bloody, like what I had, it looked literally like bags of blood, 100%, there's going to be malignant cancer cells in that fluid. And so it really was a surprise to not have it. And that's, what opened the door for me to have the surgery.
Surgery and that saved your life instead of going straight to chemo, which probably would not have.
Right. And so then I had to go through months of rehabilitation, working with the occupational as well as the physical therapist, because at this point in time, I couldn't even walk. When I first started walking, I can remember I could only walk like 2-inch paces. And after about 3 minutes, I'd be knocked out. I had to go to sleep. And they had to tie straps around me to help me, teach me how to climb up and down stairs again and to navigate the uneven ground on the outside. I had to walk up and down ramps, and it was just a slow period of rebuilding, all my muscles. And, and I was amazed because there were many things that the doctors told me. They said that, you're going to have to be put on, diuretics, because of, I was still, a lot of fluid was still accumulating in my body. And they had to put me on oxygen as well when I was going to rehab, because it was still infiltrating into that space, outside of the lungs there. And they told me I'd have to be put on Lasix or, the shots basically to release the fluid. And I didn't want to be put on that, because it was bruising my abdomen, and I kind of researched all the side effects, and I'm like, I don't think I want all this other stuff. And so they said, well, if you don't do that, then, we want you to be on aspirin. So I took some aspirin for a while, but then I said, I don't want to be on any of this. And I just said, I'm just going to try to force myself to move, because that will lower my risk of getting blood clots. And what's really interesting is that within a week after coming out of the hospital, all the fluid starts to drain out of my body. I'm literally getting up like every 2 hours through the night to use the bathroom. And when finally all the fluid came out of me, I literally was like a little stick person. It was like skin on bones. And doctors told me, they were like, you're not going to ever regrow back your muscles. And I thought, wow, is this my new body? Just knobby elbows, knobby knees. But what amazed me is that my muscles actually did come back, and they came back better. Because what I didn't mention to you before is in the 90s, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. So I had a lot of lesions within my muscle, all these knots that hurt, through the years. And when I lost all my muscles and they regrew, I didn't have all that anymore. There was, yeah. So I was just amazed. And it just, you learn how resilient our human bodies are when you go through, experiences like that. And so it's such a marvel. I just believe we have so much wisdom designed in our bodies.
Yes. And I mean, and that is a very intense experience. I mean, you really went to the brink physically in every conceivable way. And so when you say that experience sort of informed your choices going forward, and you talk about the resilience of the body, like, you really know what you're talking about. So tell me, let's jump to the quantum biology piece. So I really wanted to take time with your story because I want everyone to understand, the level to which you've been educated and the type of experience that you have scientifically, and B, the type of experience that you had physically with the severe, severe, severe extent of your illness. And so you take those two things, you have a highly trained scientific mind, and now a very challenging, intense, near-death disease experience. And you have intertwined those two things to go on a completely new path. So tell us what your perspective on cancer is. We're going to jump forward through all the time you spent learning in alternative modalities and studying with some amazing people. Let's jump forward and tell me sort of where you are now with how you view cancer through the quantum biologic lens.
Well, I view cancer as, a metabolic disease, and Dr. Thomas Seyfried wrote the textbook on it that basically revived what Dr. Otto Warburg discovered, back in the 1930s, that cancer is basically, it's like an oxygen deficiency within the body. And I believe, Dr. Seyfried basically made the connection with the mitochondria. It's an energy deficit, essentially. And so what I look at it from the experience I've had personally is I had been light deprived, just for pretty much my whole life. I had no idea the importance of sunlight. And I worked in offices within the military because of my, I held, top secret, as far as the classifications. And so I worked in offices that had no windows. And so what's interesting is in one of my assignments that had no windows, I used to actually notice that, no matter how happy and cheerful I felt before going into the office, as soon as I walked into the office, it felt like, it was like all systems down. And I didn't understand it. I thought, well, maybe it is sunlight, but I didn't really know. And what's interesting is that after I received my cancer diagnosis, I actually went back to that office with my EMF meter, and I measured magnetic fields. And
oh no!
It pegged. It was maxed out. And I was just shocked. And I was like, wow, there must be some kind of generator generating this, but I had no clue, and I'm like, no wonder,
So you were in basically a sealed box filled with non-native EMFs and no compensatory healthy frequencies, not even a window.
Exactly. Yes.
Every day for 12 to 15 hours.
Yes, or 16 to 18.
Or 16 to 18 hours. Oh, God, yeah. You really go for it. When you're doing something, you're doing it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then the early signs were the chronic fatigue, which led into the fibromyalgia, which led ultimately into the cancer.
Right. And so I feel like that, when you don't have mitochondrial function, everything begins to break down. The immune system, you don't have the proper light, you don't have enough energy in the body. And, it's no wonder I got diagnosed in the 90s with chronic fatigue syndrome. I mean, I literally was so fatigued that I could barely walk. That's how bad it was. And so, so from a quantum perspective, it's huge, and I didn't realize this, but when I was going through cancer, I got to a point where I was literally too sick to take care of myself. And so a medical missionary came in to help me. And she was such a stickler to the schedule. She was like, you are going to be in bed by 8:30 because you need to be asleep by 9 so we can get up in the morning. And she wanted me outside in the sun like twice a day.
Wow.
Yeah. And we butted heads at times, but that's exactly what I needed. And I think that actually made a difference as far as my outcome, and how things turned out, just counter to what all my doctors were thinking. And so, but at that point in time, I hadn't really yet made the connection, fully, to the importance of circadian health, circadian biology. And so I was basically traveling a lot at this point in time. And so I got into the holistic health space because I just felt like, I was given a second chance at life. I need to turn this around and help people. So I was traveling everywhere. I was away more than I was home, speaking at conferences. And after, I would say it was probably 5 years after I had recovered, I suddenly, I got a rib injury. And after that, it was like I developed electro hypersensitivity about 6 months after the rib injury. And then I developed POTS, and it got so bad that I would literally go speak at some conference and then I would end up in a hospital because it felt like my heart was going to pound out of my chest and I would get short of breath, struggling to breathe again. And my blood pressure would all of a sudden just shoot up for no reason. And after a year and a half of this, I finally start to see a pattern. And it's like, you know what? I got hospitalized in Washington, D.C., in Dallas, in Los Angeles, San Francisco. These were all the cities that had rolled out 5G. And I didn't know, but that's when I got so sick, Meredith. I was like in sensory overload. I couldn't even go outside my house because the lights were too bright and the sounds were too loud, because it would create that whole, just I couldn't breathe. And even eating food and drinking water would do the same thing. So then I got dehydrated because, I didn't want to create these issues, but I didn't know what else to do. And so it was in this state, I'm praying to God again. And I'm like, God, can you please show me how to heal from this? Because these doctors can't help me. And so all of a sudden, I had this impression to reach out to Dr. Jack Cruz. And so what an education. So I dug into his stuff and he connected all the dots for me. And he said, you have been chronically low vitamin D your whole life. Your ancestry comes out of southern China where they had a lot more sun. And even though you were born in San Francisco, you can't make enough vitamin D in that kind of sunlight at that latitude. And so he said that chronic low vitamin D combined with getting exposed to radio frequencies in your military career contributed to you getting cancer, is what he told me. And so I was getting ready to actually go to his clinic to try to, he's like, you got low redox. And I was prepared to go to his clinic. And when he saw how sick I was, he said, I'm really concerned about your survival. You really don't have much time left, because I literally was crawling in my house. I could not stand up straight. So he's like, the best thing you can do, he's like, I can't even help you fast enough. You need to go to Mexico like next week. And so I was struggling. I mean, 2 days before my flight, I could not stand up straight. And I'm like, how are they going to let me on board the flight, looking like this? And so I went to an energy healer who used some scalar energy technology from Dr. Jerry Tennant. And that helped kind of recharge my body. And I was able to get on board the flight. And as soon as I landed at the airport in Mexico, in Cancun, I already felt so much better. And I was amazed because, an airport is not in, ideal, location
Yeah.
with all the radar. But my body just all of a sudden, it just felt like all this being on edge, it all of a sudden calmed down. And he told me, you can't miss another sunlight or sunrise for the rest of your life. And he's like, go out to the beach in Mexico and just, ground yourself in the sand, get in cold water. So I went to a lot of these cenotes, these freshwater sinkholes that were formed from that crater hit, 65 million years ago in the Yucatan. And that creates some very special magnetic fields. And I could actually feel it. So I would literally sit in these cenotes like for over 5 hours in a day and just felt amazing. I mean, I felt
that sensitivity that made you so susceptible to illness from an incompatible frequency. It also works the opposite way when you're in a healing frequency. You can feel it.
Yes.
Really clearly.
Yes. It's very, very distinct difference in the energy, how it feels, energy that like from non-native EMFs that are harmful. It's literal pain versus the healing energies from nature. It just is like night and day. And so I went from literally crawling to within 2 weeks of being in Mexico, I could carry these 6-liter jugs of water up the stairs.
Wow.
It was so profound, Meredith.
So this is like, this healing is from a complete and total change in your environment where you were putting your body. Mexico does not have 5G. It probably at that time didn't even have 4G.
No, they just had 3G.
You're outside, either on the beach or in an underground water cave, watching the sunrise every day. Wow.
Yeah.
It was came back to life.
Yes. In every sense. I mean, people noticed, my family noticed. When I came back, my father was like, you really are so much stronger. And so yeah. And then, just your emotions, your mood, all of that changes too. It was just really profound. And so, getting to experience that, it was like, wow. And that's what led me, to the Quantum Biology Collective, or the, Institute of Applied Quantum Biology. Was really, I wanted to really solidify all that I had experienced in order to be able to help other people experience this, because I saw this with my own father. Okay, so he was in his 90s. He was basically, diabetic since his 50s, and he didn't want to get on medication, so he was very diligent about controlling his diet. But as he got older, it got harder. And he also had high blood pressure. So he was on blood pressure medication and eventually on metformin for the blood sugar. And so I shared with him my experiences in Mexico. And I'm like, just get out in the sunlight, So he starts to do that. And I'm like, and take cold showers, And this was, like in San Francisco. And he even though it's cold there, he took the cold showers. He went out in the sun. And his blood sugar normalized, his blood pressure normalized. He was able to actually, for a period of time, get off of all his medications in his 90s. I think he was like 95. And so I was like, that gives us so much hope, right? Because if someone at that age can reverse, there's no excuse for any of us that are younger with any of the health challenges we have.
Right. It's like amazing what the body is capable of if we give it the inputs that it needs to function properly, right? Like I just keep realizing over and over, right? It's so many of our chronic illness and diseases are from cutting ourselves off from what we need without realizing it. And when we give that back to ourselves, And then, so we cut ourselves off from what we need, and then we develop all these symptoms, and then we give ourselves, and then we're given pharmaceuticals to treat those symptoms, but we're still cut off from what we need to not have them in the first place. So it's not, the outcome can't be good. Like, there's no possible way for it to end well in that system.
Right, because we're not addressing the root cause, and the pharmaceuticals just are basically like Band-Aids. You're covering up the alarm systems in your body so that you can function. But, that's going to create a whole nother, sequela of events that you're going to have to deal with the side effects.
Wow. So how do you explain to people, because you are now, you are a health coach, and you work with people one-on-one, how do you explain to them why this is so important, and how light matters to cancer, and how our thoughts and our emotions matter to cancer? What's your sort of way of laying that out for people who might be like, sorry, what?
Well, I explained to them that we're first and foremost, we're energy beings. And so there actually is, biophotonic energy within our body, and that light has to be coherent. And the easiest way I explain that is just with laser. The reason why laser light is so much more intense is because it's coherent. All the phases of light waves are all, in sync. And so it's very intense versus a light bulb, which is more diffuse, which is, incoherent lighting. And so I explained to them that when our bodies, which are designed to actually radiate coherent light, when we get sick or when something is not quite right within an organ or whatever system, we begin to emit incoherent light. And so in order to correct that, we don't correct it with food necessarily because, yes, there are electrons in there, but we have to go back to the source. That plant got its energy, the sugars, it made it from sunlight, and we can get that directly too. And so I explained to people, we have, receptors in our eyes and our skin that can actually, absorb certain frequencies of light, and how important that is. And, so that's kind of the approach that I take, that it's important, the light, the ambient light that we surround ourselves with, just because we're absorbing it. And so then I kind of walk them through the differences even between, the old incandescent bulbs that we used to have and now this LED bulbs. And, so I talk to them about blue light toxicity and why that's important because, for the body, like, you think of any kind of chronic condition, but especially cancer. I mean, it's like when the body can no longer communicate with itself because it doesn't have the coherency in the light to send the proper signals, that's when you're going to get, these breakdowns in the body. And I explain it using something that, Dr. Jack Cruz mentioned to me a long time ago with the, vitamin D. People think, oh, I can just take vitamin D. I don't need the sun. And I explained to them, because that's what he told me. It's like, well, no, because you're getting the chemical signature of the vitamin D, but you don't have that photonic energy if you were out in the sun. And so I just encourage people to just get out there, just get out there in the morning. If you have to go to bed earlier at night, because I run into that a lot. People are just night owls, and but they're struggling with fatigue. And so I let them know, if you just kind of adjust, your bedtime a little bit earlier each night so you can get up earlier, you're going to notice a difference. And so once you notice how much better you're feeling, there's just no turning back.
Yeah, it's true. I can attest to that. And yeah, I had the chronic fatigue journey as well. And, I'm glad I have a really low tolerance for a low quality of life, because I think dealing with that probably saved me from much worse outcomes that I was, the path that I was headed on, the things that I was doing. to basically make my mitochondria non-functional. And it's, it's so funny because these things are, they're simple. And so I think sometimes people feel like the solution should be, the problem seems so complex, the solution should be complex, but it's not. Or the application of, the actual actions to take are simple. The scientific explanation can be quite complex. What else would you have to say on the topic of what cancer is from a metabolic perspective, from a quantum perspective? And so we have the light piece. What about our thoughts, our emotions, the people that we're surrounded by? If we're energy beings, frequency beings, like how is that affecting our ability to heal or prevent disease?
I'm so glad you're bringing this up, Meredith, because the emotional piece and our thoughts, that's huge. And I always tell people, you cannot, because people are just so on this whole diet thing, right? And it's like, it doesn't matter how healthy of the food you're eating if you have toxic thoughts or if you have unresolved traumas and past conflicts that have not been resolved. Because what happens is, I kind of try to explain this simply, is that, when you have a negative thought or a belief or an emotion, it basically creates these neural peptides that basically are going to change your biology. It's a whole cascade that goes on. Candace Pert wrote about this in her Molecules of Emotion book. And so it's really important to look at that because, if someone is doing all the right things, but, the needle hasn't moved for them, this is the piece that I feel like not enough of doctors even consider the emotional piece of healing, emotional and spiritual, because I feel like, we need to really address our humanity in its wholeness. We're not just purely physical beings. We're spirits having a human experience. And so those pieces need to be addressed. And I often explain that those are actually, more of the causal factor than some of the physical, things that we think about when it comes to health. And so I really feel like to get to the root cause, you have to kind of get to deep into the emotions. And that's why I, worked on additional certifications with like the emotion code, for example, and body code and belief code, because that addresses, how to actually help people to remove this. And what's really fascinating is I've learned you don't actually need to have people relive the trauma, because I think many people are afraid of that. It's just so much emotions and it's so overwhelming to have horrible emotions. And the beauty of the modality, which is an energy healing modality, is that you can actually release these, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and you can actually experience a shift immediately in the physical body. And I've seen this time and time again, with pain, whether it's headaches, stomach aches, what have you, old arthritic pain, that someone's had for years. It really just, when I look at this, it's very striking to me, because I look at the body like it's poetic. It lets these pains that you're having in your body, it's not random, because when you look at, like traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture system with the meridians, there's meridians that pertain to certain organ systems, and so anger, for example, like if someone is prone to a lot of anger, well, that can be generated by the liver, but it can also affect the liver. Grief kind of is connected with the lungs, fear more with the kidneys. And so you see there's a direct correlation between emotions, which is essentially energy. And I believe it's energy, like negative emotions actually create a lack of coherence in that biophotonic energy within the body. And that's why it's so harmful. That's why we need to be so mindful as far as, what are our thoughts, and in order to do that, I kind of urge people, pay attention to your body. If you think about something and you're feeling kind of contracted, that's probably not a good thought. It could be creating fear or anxiety, what have you. But if you think about something and it leads to an openness and a feeling of expansion, then, that's probably a good thought to have. So I kind of use that as a, pretty simple rule of thumb to help people.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And before we end, I want to circle back to the very first project that you worked on out of college involved liquid crystal. And I know in the quantum biologic world, we love to talk about how we are liquid crystal. Tell me what comes to mind for you when I say that.
Well, oh my goodness, Meredith, I think about, just our connective tissue and the fascia and, how those are like the superconductor highways in our body, and how I really believe that it's liquid crystal in that, you get an alignment of the cells so that they can emit the light that they're supposed to emit. If you have things that are off angle, you're not going to get the level of light intensity nor in the proper phase. That's, if you have something that's like this, it's going to basically create, just a lack of coherent light. And so, that's my perspective in that we really are, there's our bodies are so incredible. We function a lot like, just like gemstones. And, there's a scripture in the Bible that says, God basically is telling his people, if you don't praise me, the rocks are going to cry out, and we just used to think, well, that's just, a metaphor or whatever. But I actually, look at things a little bit more literally in that, we have a structure within our body that is very much like crystal kind of technology, liquid crystal, if you will. And it's all about, having things be in phase and lined up and coherent in order to have excellent health the way it's supposed to be, the way we were designed to have health.
Right. So you started out putting the liquid crystal into coherence to direct the lasers, and now we're in a whole new world.
Yes.
Whole new type of liquid crystal. So I often hear people say as well that all technology is in some way based on nature, is reverse engineered out of nature. Absolutely. Does that feel true to you? Having been you're a person who has looked deeply from the technological side and studied it and built things with the technology. And now you're someone who's looked deeply into the biology side and the natural world and the health side. What is your take on that idea?
Yes. When I was at the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, we actually there was actually a category of funding, and it was in the field of biomimicry. And biomimicry looks at mimicking nature. So we actually researched, like moths, looking at their antennas to see how they would interact with the environment, and looking at the skins of, certain insects and certain animals, that basically were developed into smart skin, on aircraft, for example. And so a lot of that, it's directly inspired by nature, looking at extremophiles, these little critters that live deep in the ocean. It's so cold, but they can survive. How do they do that? There's something that we can learn from nature. And I I can't speak highly enough for just our connection with nature. We're a part of creation. And, just with modern technology, we've, isolated ourselves from our very nature. And, I learn a lot from just observing the animals, just seeing how they operate. But yeah, getting back to your question about the technology, we're even looking at, just the pigmentation of color. How do the hummingbirds have these beautiful shimmery colors, but it depends on how the light is actually, hitting their feathers. And that basically dictates what color we'll see through our eyes. And we can learn a lot from that. There's a lot of research now that's in something called structural color, which is very different than colors based on pigmentation. And they're looking at animals, for that.
So interesting. Do you have any, based on all your experience, professional, personal, in the healing world, do you have any hypotheses that have yet to be quote unquote proven that you think are happening in terms of anything to do with health or disease or illness, or any ideas, connections that you're like, you know what, I think?
Well, I kind of feel like there, as far as health and, why disease might develop, I'm going to go into the spiritual realm now. That's the piece that I feel like can maybe, potentially be offensive to people, or be controversial. But you really have to, I believe you have to get to the root cause. And, when you look at modern psychology, they've basically said, oh, that's like a negative emotion. They've taken the spiritual, which is that, well, no, these emotions can actually be linked to actual spiritual entities, sentient beings. And that is really important to look at, and so this kind of goes back to ancestrally, what has your family line, what has it experienced in terms of traumas, and trying to resolve things from that perspective. And so I feel like, in my perspective, that to really have true healing on the most holistic levels, it goes beyond even the emotions. It goes into the spiritual realm where you look at, what's really at the root cause of whatever you're struggling with. How the modern medicine kind of looks at genetics, and they'll say, well, your parents, your grandparents had diabetes, so it's genetic. Well, we can look at it from a perspective, well, yeah, there's lifestyle habits that were passed on, but beyond lifestyle, what else is there? And that's the spiritual component, looking at what happened ancestrally in your family line, because those things spiritually can get passed on in your DNA. And so,
how do you see that happening? Like, what's your thought on how that is getting passed on? Like, what's the mechanism?
I feel like there's an awakening, that people are realizing that, just using the methods that they know to get well, that they reach a plateau, in their healing. And so I kind of feel like that if someone truly is a seeker of truth and they want to really heal, then that's going to cause them to dig deeper. You see, in my own journey, when I first started my cancer journey, I thought it was all about diet, because as a scientist, I could understand nutrition. It made sense to me. But then I got to a point where I was like, I've got all these different conflicts I need to resolve. And so I worked with a psychotherapist for a while just to deal with confronting my own mortality. And she really helped me. She helped me to look at things that had gone on within my family system that needed resolution, but I never had the courage to confront my parents about certain things because I was afraid. I was afraid of their anger. And I just kind of lived under that. It's like, if you don't deal with the emotions and the true root causes, you create a prison that you're basically imprisoning yourself. And that can bring about a whole host of, just disease conditions that no one wants to really deal with. And so I really feel like in my own journey, I have come to see that, and I see this on many fronts. For example, I used to be able to, I love like deep tissue massage, right? And so they're working all this stuff out. And then after I recovered from cancer, I could no longer tolerate deep tissue massage. I ended up getting injured from it. And so then when I got to the point where, I was dealing with some of the circadian and quantum biology issues in my body, I actually found it was energy healers and practitioners working on an energetic level that actually made a huge difference for me. And so when you look at that trajectory, it's almost like, our tendency is to focus on what we can see, the solid, the physical, but true healing, you kind of look at really our true essence, which is the spirit. And so you need to kind of go on that path of really seeking what really is causing this issue in the body. And oftentimes it's not, we like to beat ourselves up over what we're eating. But, as I experienced when I was down in Mexico, I had so much more latitude and leeway in eating different foods just because the UV index of the sun was so much higher. And so you see this direct input of how this energetic source from the sun changes your biology. So, it doesn't really matter so much what you eat. And it's the same thing with, I look at it with the emotional and then the spiritual. If you're dealing with things on a spiritual level, there are, symptoms and manifestations in your body that don't have to manifest because you're treating things on a energetic spiritual level. That's where the breakdown occurs. We all have this biofield around our bodies. And when we don't have that coherence that I talk about in the light, you can see this. They've done Carillion photography imaging of people's aura and biofields. So you can see how, sometimes the energy field is just really collapsed. And so what's causing that collapse in the energy field? Because ultimately your body is not going to be able to function because it needs both the energy to do the function, but it needs the correct information to do the function too. And so there's this big collapse, energetically and informationally, there could be an issue. But if you can correct it in time, so that it goes back to the way it's supposed to look, you may not have any of the symptoms that you would otherwise have, and so that's why I'm a huge proponent of really looking at things from an energetic perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting to me too, because, so assuming we're eating like actual food and not, processed crap, like if it's real food, we're getting real food and we're getting real light. We've established sort of like a baseline of coherence that then enables us to more effectively perhaps process or work with our emotions and the wider energy fields around us.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you add anything to that or expand?
Well, I just think that, there's a concept of resonance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're putting in, foods that are coherent in their energy, it's only going to, feed into our energy system. And when we have the thoughts that are high energy thoughts to accompany them, then I think that's like the perfect blend in terms of energetically. And so, what you see is you can actually shift the environment that you're in. Like, you can go into a room with people and you can tell right away if there's some kind of negative or dark energy. Most people can pick that up. But we can actually shift that. It's like instead of joining in on people who are complaining about something, just shift it. Just say, hey, look at this, and everyone follows, and so collectively, I feel like we can make a difference by shifting the energy to a higher level, to a greater level of coherence. And it helps us not only individually, but, just collectively, even in our society. It's a huge deal. I mean, these are the things that seem, intangible to people because we can't see it, but it's so real. I always say to people, because, they don't believe in things they can't see. It's like, well, do you have a toothache? How do you know it's there? You can't see it, right? But you can feel it. So that's the reality of energy. There's energy that's been corrupted, that's going to be harmful, but then there's energy that's healing, that can, we can be the conduit for that light energy into this world and make a difference to everyone that we come in contact with.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Deanna. Thank you for being here and sharing your extraordinary story. What a life you have led so far and continue to lead. And thank you for translating all of your experiences into something powerfully positive for the rest of us.
Oh, thank you so much, Meredith. Thank you for all that you're doing to bring this important, message of quantum biology to the masses, just for what you're doing with the podcast and with the curriculum. It's really cutting edge, and I'm just excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, well, I'm excited you're here, and I look forward to having more conversations with you. I feel like there's so much that we could dive into. We've just kind of laid the foundation with this. With this episode. So let me know. Send me some emails or leave comments on YouTube or wherever you want, and let me know what we should talk to Deanna about next time, because I'm sure that everyone's got a million questions for you as well. All right. We will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye.
Woohoo! You made it to the end of another episode. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploratory adventure into new realms. Your energy and support are building a different world, and I am so grateful to be on this journey with you. Take care, and thanks.